How about this? The U.S. Park Police are...
Start by storming Blackgate!
What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is, of course, my top 10 worst movies of 2021. I do apologize in advance for giving this video out late. I'm filming this as of February 2nd, 2022. Originally, I was supposed to get this out December 30th, December 31st, but as many of you probably know through watching a couple of my last videos, I've had a lot going on in late December and January. So finally got around to doing this, and I'm very excited to give this to you guys. And don't worry, I will also be giving you guys my top 10 favorite films, aka best films of 2021 in my opinion. I have a couple more films to watch before revealing that. Still working on that, so be patient, but that will be coming out probably in the coming weeks. But obviously for now, guys, let's talk top 10 worst movies of 2021 in my opinion. So this year there were a lot of disappointing movies. There were only like a handful of movies that I actually truly thought were terrible. But again, that's very different from other years. Most years it's like there's the top 10 worst movies. They're all like 1 out of 5. But this year it was like a lot of them were like 2 out of 5. But I'll quickly be going through them. And keep in mind, again, this is just my personal opinion. Your list will probably be different. Some of these you might even like, and that's okay. But I'll be going from 10 to 1, with 1 being obviously my worst movie of 2021 that I personally saw. So enough exposition, guys. Let's get started. So to kick things off, we have number 10, which is Black Widow. Yeah, this was Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh. I like both of them, I really do. But this movie was just such a knockoff of like Jason Bourne, Mission Impossible movies. Really doesn't stand out apart from the MCU, especially since we already know what happens to Black Widow. So it's like a prequel, but it also sets up like, you know, TV shows in the MCU. It's a bunch of baloney if you ask me personally. I was not a fan of this movie. I wanted to like it, I did, but it was very bland, and that's why it is my number 10. Quite disappointing for me personally. Next up, we have number 9. Speaking of disappointing, we have Army of the Dead. So Army of the Dead, I like Zack Snyder, I really do, but this movie was way too long, poorly paced. Also, how the zombie apocalypse even started to begin with at the very beginning with the convoy and everything, really did not like that. Characters weren't interesting. There just wasn't that much to like about it. Cinematography, I really wasn't a big fan of, which is a surprise for Zack Snyder movie. But this movie overall just was quite a big disappointment for me. I get why some people might like it, but for me personally, really did not like it, and that's why it's my number 9. Next up, number 8, we have The Woman in the Window, another disappointment, a Joe Wright movie. I like Joe Wright. He did Atonement and Hannah, but for every Hannah and Atonement, we also have a movie like Pan and now this. The Woman in the Window definitely is very much so trying to take from Rear Window, and it unfortunately is quite disappointing, not only because of such a great cast, but also because it paying homage so much to Rear Window, it's not able to stand out on its own. It just feels like a ripoff and a much lesser version of said movie. Again, very much so talent in front of the camera, behind the camera, but unfortunately didn't really translate to a good movie, and instead was quite a disappointing movie. And honestly, it's a movie that I forgot I even watched until I looked back and I was like, oh yeah, I really didn't like that movie. And that's why it's my number 8. Next up, we have number 7, which is Venom, Let There Be Carnage. So the first Venom in 2018, I actually quite enjoyed. I would say it's kind of a guilty pleasure. I liked, Venom and Eddie Brock, their chemistry and everything. But the sequel, they take that out, and instead they have it where it's just a bunch of CGI porn that's displayed on screen. It's a mess of a movie, it really is. Honestly, it reminded me of like Suicide Squad, the 2016 one, where there's just so much that's going on in 90 minutes that it's like you just don't even care because it's just nonsense with what's happening. The final fight scene, which, let's be honest, Let There Be Carnage, is whatever so many people are looking forward to, honestly happened so fast that it's like, okay, what was the point of even having Carnage if he's such a one-dimensional villain? So there's just things happen on screen just because I wasn't a big fan of this movie. In fact, I really didn't like it. Gave me kind of a headache. And honestly, if I could go back, I would give this movie a 1 out of 5, but I was generous. I think I gave it like a 1.5 or 2 out of 5. Too generous in my eyes looking back. But yeah, that's why it's my number 7. Next up, my number 6 is Mortal Kombat. This is an R-rated action movie, and it has no excuse as to why it had such poorly filmed action scenes. Honestly, you couldn't tell what was going on during the action scenes. You really couldn't. And it's like, I would get it if it's a PG-13 movie, so it's like you're trying to, hide like the violence to, obviously get like a PG-13 rating. But this movie's R-rated. There is gore and everything, but it's just not really handled well in terms of the choreography, the cinematography. I really didn't like it. The characters, not interesting. Dialogue, oh my goodness, so cringy. Sequel's coming out. Not looking forward to it, but I probably will watch it. But my goodness, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking with this movie. And yeah, that's why it's my number 6. Next up, we have number 5, which is He's All That. So this is Addison Rae's debut film. And to be honest, I don't really know what to think of her as an actress. But as a movie, this is just terrible. Very terrible. It's like one of those movies where it's so mediocre that you just can't help but want to, honestly just sit back and say, why am I watching this? Really, why am I? Because 2 minutes in, you know everything that's going to happen, and it happens. Characters do things just because, at the expense of the plot, and not necessarily feeling organic. This movie definitely was just a cash grab. That Kourtney Kardashian shows up, and her cameo is very cringy. Not a fan of this movie in the slightest. In fact, I really didn't like this movie, and that's why it's my number 5. Next up, number 4, we have Coming to America. So this movie was just dull, man. Really dull. Comedy, non-existent. Like the original I thought was just all right. Like I felt kind of mixed about it. But this one is a huge step down. The original was R-rated. This one's PG-13. And you definitely feel that. You definitely feel like the boundaries. And honestly, with the boundaries of a PG-13 comedy, like sometimes you can be clever about it. But with this movie, nothing felt clever about the humor. It all felt really forced. And honestly, none of the actors really seemed like they wanted to be there other than for a cash grab. I mean, that's what this movie essentially is. I hope we don't get a third one because, again, Coming to America, I really didn't like. I was so bored. I think it was like 2 hours, but it felt like 6 hours. Not a good movie in my opinion, and that's why it's my number 4. Next up, we have number 3, which is Space Jam: A New Legacy, a.k.a. Product placement for HBO Max. That's what this movie is, and honestly, it was frustrating to watch because while watching this, I can't lie, like when I saw like Game of Thrones, Mad Max Fury Road, Clockwork Orange, when I saw that it was, obviously advertising those movies, I was saying to myself, why am I even watching this movie? I could be watching those at home. Instead, I had to watch this movie where it's just such a paint-by-numbers kids movie that is excruciatingly dull. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it is a movie that it's so cringe-inducing. It really is. Like, I get the love for the original, but this one, I don't get the love for this one. I don't get why some people really like this, but to each in his own. This movie personally gave me a headache. I really didn't like it, and that's why it's my number 3. Also, terrible villain. Don Cheadle's villain. Such a hack fraud. Did not like his villain in the slightest. But that was my number 3. Next up, my number 2 is also an HBO Max Warner Brothers movie similar to Space Jam: A New Legacy. And my number 2 is Tom and Jerry. So when it actually focuses on Tom and Jerry for like 5 minutes, it's actually good. But the thing is, this movie is 90 minutes long, and the rest of the 85 minutes is just nonsense. It's characters doing things just because, romance side plots, it's not interesting. Honestly, Tom and Jerry, the shorts that came out, I believe it was like 30s, 40s, those were great. The novelty of it was that it was like 10, 15 minutes. So it didn't, obviously lose that welcome mat. This, because they're not in it that much, it just feels paper thin and it feels like they don't know what to do with these characters. So I definitely think that if they do try to do another Tom and Jerry movie, maybe they should flesh them out more. Maybe should give them more screen time. But as it stands, this movie just was very disappointing. I really did not like it. That's why it's my number 2. Next up, my number 1 is, God's Not Dead, We the People. So I'm just going to say this. This movie was absolutely terrible. I went on a rant, via movie review. You guys can check that out actually on YouTube. But I also went even further in depth on my Letterboxd review. And basically, I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen the other 3, but just know that I think this is probably the second worst in the series. It's just, it's propaganda. It's even more propaganda based than the other ones. Like this literally just feels like a 90-minute advertisement as to why homeschooling is the way to go. And I mean, as someone that was homeschooled and went to private school and also went to public school, I don't think that's a really good message. Nothing per se wrong with it. Per se, again, it's arguably, but I do think that this is a movie that advertising that and just kind of talking about like all these political topics and religious topics, I just think it handles it in such a one-dimensional way that it just, all it's really doing is preaching to the choir. And it's like, if you're not eating up what it's selling, you're not going to like it. And for me personally, I couldn't really digest it. Filmmaking is terrible. Rewatchability value is terrible. Entertainment value, it's terrible. Definitely would not recommend this movie other than unless you've seen the other 3 and you want to, may as well, try to finish off the series. I would watch it then in that case. But besides that, I would avoid God's Not Dead, We the People at all costs. And that's my top 10 worst movies of 2021. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Let me know your top 10 worst movies of 2021 down below. And as always, with the subscription, notification bell, and all that, catch you guys later.